Before you go to bed tonight, there's something that you need to check. It might just save your life. I recall waking up suffocating and drenched in sweat. I was 8 years old, and I had one of those nights where I just couldn't sleep. The room was scorching hot, and I'd spent the whole day inside eating popsicles and watching TV. There was this weird buzzing in my ears, and my whole body felt twitchy, like it was punishing me for spending the day on the couch. Worst of all was my pillow. It had never been this lumpy before. The case had gotten sweaty right away, and then it was immediately wet again after I turned it over. No matter how much I tossed and turned, I just couldn't get comfortable. But this wasn't just because of the summer heat. Finally, I got up and walked past my little sister's room and walked downstairs, where my dad was watching baseball. Seeing me, he muted it and asked if I needed anything. I shrugged. My pillow sucks, that's all. He nodded. Then he got this weird smile and said, "Maybe it's Mr. Pillow." My dad has always been a goofball. When my mom had left when my sister Madison and I were little, he had stepped up in a big way, loving us double. He was always the one to tell us stupid ghost stories on camping trips about demon-possessed deer or bears who loved the smell of girls' shampoo. And then of course he'd come rattle the tent in the middle of the night and scare us out of our minds. "I'm just going to get some water and then head back to bed," I said. I looked over at the TV. The Brewers were losing by like 8 runs, so maybe he was trying to distract himself. "He was a real creep," said my dad, ignoring me. Of course he wasn't called the Mr. Pillow back then. I think his name was Douglas something. He loved sneaking into kids' rooms and then strangling them to death. "Thanks for that," I said, pouring myself a glass of water. "That's definitely going to help me sleep." "Of course, they caught him eventually," said my dad. "Big trial and everything. But before he ever got convicted, his cellmates suffocated him to death with a pillow." "Got it," I said. I turned to the fridge and found some leftover pizza. Then I carefully started picking off the pepperoni as my dad continued. "The weird thing came the next night," said my dad. "He told me that they found the cellmate dead too, suffocated. Except there'd been no one in the cell to do the deed. Now I know what you're thinking. It was probably the guards, right? Maybe. But then other people started dying. Other prisoners who'd messed up Douglas, all suffocated in their beds. That's when they started calling him Mr. Pillow." "Ooh," I scoffed. "So spooky." I wasn't believing this for a second. "And then kids in the neighborhood near the prison started dying too. He said the moms would come in and find them dead in their beds. The only thing linking the deaths was that some of the kids had mentioned being uncomfortable in their beds the night before, asking if their parents had switched out the pillows. It can happen to anyone." My dad's face was blank. He wasn't blinking. "Dad," I said, "this is the dumbest thing ever. Just stop." And then in the morning they'd find the kids' old pillows stashed away somewhere, and on the bed there'd be no pillow at all, like it had just disappeared. I didn't even acknowledge that last part. I just hit the bathroom and walked up to bed. Soon enough, I heard the sounds of the baseball game come back on the TV as my dad unmuted it. Then, as I approached my room, I heard footsteps and the creak of a window. I walked inside and looked at my bed. I was missing both of my pillows. The window was open a crack, and I ran over to it. It was dark and rainy outside, and I didn't see anyone out there. Finally, I closed the window, making sure it was locked tight. "Dad," I called out. "This isn't funny." No response. My heart was beating about 1,000 beats a minute. I walked over to my closet and opened it. Inside, I saw my usual pillow sitting on the floor. I screamed and ran downstairs as fast as I could. "Dad!" I shouted. There was no one sitting on the couch. The TV was still on, but it wasn't showing the baseball game. It was showing an advertisement. It was for a pillow. It would fold up with a piece of Velcro, and the kids were able to hug the pillow. It was called Mr. Pillow. I was shaking. I didn't know what to do. When the advertisement started to finish, it cut to a distorted, dark room. Children were lying on their Mr. Pillows face down. Each one was covered in blood from head to toe. I backed away from the TV. Sweat was building on my hands. One kid cried out in a blood-curdling scream, and a man in all black walked over to her and pushed her head further down into the pillow. Silence. The TV turned off, and the house went silent. "Dad, Dad, where are you?" No response. There was a ring at the doorbell. I knew I wasn't going to open that, but I simply took a peek through the blinds. It was a Mr. Pillow, lying there on my welcome mat. I ran to the other side of the house. Tears were falling down my face. I ran to my parents' bedroom. Dad, please stop with all this." My dad was lying on his bed, face down. His face was smothered by a Mr. Pillow. I slowly walked up to him, my legs trembling as I took each step. When I touched his face, he let out a deafening scream. His face came up from the blood-stained pillow, and he was missing his nose and one of his eyes. Before I could back away, he grabbed my head and forced it on the pillow. I couldn't breathe. My face was scorching hot. It felt like it was burning off. He was pushing so hard that I couldn't even get a word out. This was how I was going to die, I thought. My own father was going to smother me to death. Then he stopped. I felt a hand lift off the back of my head. When I looked up, my father was gone. When I walked back to the living room, he was sitting there watching the baseball game. I was so confused. Had I just imagined all of this? I couldn't have. I was still recovering from my lack of airflow, and my face still felt hot. My father's head was turned away from me as he motioned his hand for me to come to him. "Come sit down, honey." I was skeptical, but I slowly followed. "I want to teach you a bit about baseball. You see the batter here? He's swung at 2 balls that are within the square. If he gets the 3rd strike, he goes to sleep." "Goes to sleep?" I asked. "Yes. He won't wake up." The batter was missing a nose and an eye. By the time I had walked up to the couch, I saw my father's face. He still had the same horrifying, deformed face. I backed away. He stood up and I stumbled to my knees. Everyone needs to sleep at some point. You can't stay awake forever. I managed to bring myself to my feet just before he lunged at me. I dove under his legs, and he fell into the wall behind me. I ran up the stairs as I heard his screaming from behind me. "Go to sleep! Get to bed! Now!" I made my way to my little sister's room, who was supposed to be sleeping soundly at this point. After all the noises in the house, I wouldn't be surprised if she was awake. Once I got in the room, I locked the door behind me. There wasn't any banging, just a silent knock. My father whispered through the door, "Sweet dreams." I couldn't make out anything in my sister's dark room, but I could hear her soft, muffled breathing. She was still asleep. "Madison, Madison." I followed the direction of the breathing. I made my way to her bed. The breathing sounded muffled. It was sporadic and there was no smooth rhythm to it. I reached my hand out and felt her face. She let out an ear-splitting scream, and her entire body jolted awake. She dug her fingernails into my head and pushed it to the pillow. It was a force that was impossible for a 4-year-old girl. She buried my face in the pillow. It was the same as what my father did to me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. The sharp nails of my sister kept digging into the back of my head. I swung my arms around, trying to grab her and get her off me. No matter where I pushed her, her nails stayed put. They didn't leave my head. The burning sensation came back. I felt my face burning off to a crisp. This was my fate. My baby sister was going to suffocate me to death. My playful, loving, beautiful little sister. My sister let out a whisper, and it sounded like blood was filling her lungs. "Go to sleep." I was losing consciousness. No air was getting to my lungs. I couldn't see anything aside from the empty void of what I assumed to be a pillow. Mr. Pillow. The force on my head lightened. I felt my sister's nails leave my skull. The feeling of blood dripping down my scalp subsided. I was able to move again. I lifted my head up from the pillow, but I wasn't in my sister's room anymore. It was no longer dark. I was in my own room. The sun was shining through the blinds. Wind was blowing through the crack of my open window. But my pillows felt different. They weren't soft. They were fuzzy. They were Mr. Pillows. I heard my dad calling for me from downstairs. "Honey, breakfast is ready." Maybe my dad got me new pillows. Maybe this was my gift. Maybe it was all a bad dream. I dreamt all of this. I'm sure of it. "Be down in a sec, Dad." I was in a hurry to rush downstairs. It was Sunday. Dad always makes pancakes on Sunday. I threw on some new clothes and splashed some water on my face. Now it might have been me still waking up or have been in a hurry to run downstairs, but I could have sworn my face looked funny. My nose looked different, and my left eye looked odd. It was a long night. I think I'm going to let my dad know that I don't like the new pillows that he gave me. So do me a favor. Take a look at your pillows. Make sure they're the right ones. Make sure they're not hot, but cold. Make sure they're not fuzzy, but smooth. Make sure your room isn't too hot. Make sure you won't suffocate to death while sleeping. Because if you don't, you're going to have a really, really hard time sleeping tonight.